Okay, are you ready to do the detail inking now? This is where we get all of our dimension. And that's the reason I added these elements in here, was so I could show you some different techniques. So that on the wood grain, I want you to hold your pen kind of far back like this, and I want you just to make some random marks. And over here where it bulges out, a lot of times I will pretend it's a knot, and I will draw a squiggle, and then I will make the marks around it where there was a tree branch or something and the rest of it grew around that. You can make longer ones, you can make short ones, we can put a knot here in the middle and make these things go around it, the wood grain go around it, but it's a lot of broken lines. Don't make them, see, these are kind of the same, so I need to lengthen this one out or that looks too much the same. I'm dragging my pen as I do this, and it will also continue down into here behind this. You should be able to hear my pen as I'm making the marks. Now you could hold your pen straight up, but then you will have darker marks. So if there's an area you want a darker mark, that's okay. But I find that I can make it finer, more realistic lines if I hold my pen back. And I forgot to mention that I am using the extra fine end of the pen now. Now when we start to work with the viola, you will notice on the viola that they have a face like a pansy, and they have some really dark marks in here. So we're going to put those dark marks in first. And I am pressing a little harder now with my pen as I put those in. And I am looking at my colored photo to see how those are placed. And something else that I just started doing recently is adding what I call directional lines. And I find the center, and I keep my pen above it, and I see that there's a dip here. I want this to follow the center, and I'm going to make that mark. And I'm going to look over here, and I'm going to see that I need to make a few lighter marks here because this petal is growing out from the center, and I just want to establish a little bit of what's going on here before I start doing a whole lot of inking. I've got a little bit of a dip here, and if I want to also have a curve, I could add one there. Down here there's a dip. I start it, when I touch down, I touch on the darker outline line, and I pull it away from that outline line, lifting it as I pull it. I know I do it so fast that it can be kind of hard to see what I'm doing. So up here in this curve, we're going to need to add a little shading. And again, in order to get these strokes light, I am going to move back on my pen. And I hope that you can hear that light markings that I've got going on here. I'm going to pull some more out from the center. This petal is in front of this petal, so there's going to be a little bit of a shadow in here. If I pull my line straight out like that, and then I come across them, that is called cross hatching, and I do that when I want it to get a little bit darker. The important thing is to make a lot of very light lines, and you just keep doing them on top of each other until you have it as dark as you want it. This little dip right here, do you see how I just keep going over and over and over that line, and it gets darker? You want them all in varying thicknesses and in varying lengths. Now it appears to me in my photo that there's just like a little dark mark right in here on this one. On these ones the mark is real pale, but they've got a dip in here, and I sort of added that, and I'm going to just color that in with my ink. And again, I'm doing several lines, light lines rather than one heavy one. And I want my petals to bend down away, so I'm going to put a little light shading out here at these edges. turning my work, and I'm going to shade right here underneath this. There are other pens that you can use to do this. I like the Faber-Castell brand, but it takes a long time to dry. If I'm going to paint it, or I could drag my hand through it, it's not a problem on paper, but on canvas you can end up smearing your work if you're not careful. And since I do teach a lot and I love teaching, I like to do what's easiest for my students and easiest for a classroom setting, and that's why I just stick with the Identipens. They're very inexpensive, and they dry quickly, and they give us all a very happy experience. Can you see the depth that's starting to be created now in this? Now we've got some leaves down here, and I did draw in, when I trace this on, I did trace in these lines, but I don't trace them on with the ink. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come along it, and I'm going to very lightly shade here to create the dimension there that I want from that center vein. And I can create little divots in here if I want to. I pretend that this comes up and catches the light, this goes away from the light, this catches the light, this goes away from the light. So I'm going to draw right in those dips. And see, when I'm drawing my marks, I always make sure they are pointing to the center here, where it is attaching to the stem. That's one of the things that you just have to always keep in mind when you're working with flowers and leaves. It'll look wonky if you don't. Now, their other side veins come out like this. And we'll draw some darkness along these guys. And a little bit here, the calyx here is going to make a shadow on the bud. And let's pretend this calyx part is in front of this one. And if you see it differently, you can color it differently. And to get these, it just works for me to turn my paper. And this is a brand new pen, so the ink is nice and rich. Sometimes I like using older pens where the ink comes out a little bit lighter, or I do like the Faber-Castell where I've got other sizes and nibs. That's the disadvantage of the Identipen, but generally I can make it work pretty well. I do love the Kohinoor Rapidograph pens, but I don't always plan ahead, or I should say I rarely plan ahead, and get the pens cleaned and with fresh ink before I'm ready to ink a design. They seem to always be sitting around with old dried up ink in them. And I mean, I've used them for years and years and years, and they are beautiful. When I want to do a really, really great art piece, sometimes I will dig them out and prepare them, like the design that I made for our oldest son when he got married. And that's basically all you need to do. I think maybe I want this to, and my ink is just coming out a little darker than I would like it, so I'm going to move my hand even farther back on the pen, because I want it just to dip down just a little bit on these ends here. And I am barely touching the paper to get this to come out lighter. So that's the trick to getting your ink to be finer and lighter. Hold your pen back and barely touch your paper. And I do ink fairly dark, so don't worry about it. And every time I do an ink design, I see it differently, and it comes out differently. Now we can have some finer grasses down here mixed in with this. grass, we could come in here now, and let's say if our light source is coming from the upper left, let's put some shadowing here on our wood grain, and that will lift our viola forward. And if I want this dip here to be more pronounced, I can draw it a little deeper and color under it. Do you see how that lifted that petal forward? Come down around into here a little bit. Have some shading over here. We could have a bit of shading for these stems. This is a relatively simple design, so I'm not going to get overly carried away with some of this. I just want to show you the basics of the strokes that you can use and how fun it is to take a single line drawing that's basically two-dimensional and help it become three-dimensional. So thank you for joining me.